In this tutorial, I want to cover a topic that recently got me really excited, and that is writing GLSL shaders with the help of AI. A while ago, actually, I tried this with ChatGPT, and it didn't really work out, and I had a lot of errors. But recently, I tried it again, and this time I tried by using a code editor directly and using the AI assistants that you have in there. And because they have like more context to what's actually going on with the code itself, this time it actually really worked surprisingly well, and I had some pretty cool results. Now, I'm gonna head into TouchDesigner here and just show you some of the quick examples that I made. This is like just a very basic shader of a kind of a square with some chromatic aberration effect. And then here I also have this chromatic aberration as an effect on a noise that's coming in as an input. So this can also be, like sort of video effects that you apply to any incoming input, which can also be very interesting. Also, you can create this kind of, textures and stuff like this wouldn't be too easy to recreate with noise inside of TouchDesigner, like with feedback or something like that. So you can really get some very interesting, unique results that are just kind of not so easily recreatable. And then you can also go into 3D space and create some, that's where it gets really wild, when you start creating some actual like 3D geometry such as fractals. That's just where where stuff gets pretty exciting. It's really kind of a very interesting process, and I think it's kind of important to see it as a very experimental process as well. Like, I think if you have a super clear goal on what you want to do, you might have a hard time to get to it. But if you really embrace the process and like, be open for the happy accidents and the sort of unexpected stuff, then it can get really, really fun. Now, just to cover like the basics of GLSL and shaders, I can highly recommend this resource, The Book of Shaders, from Patricio Gonzalez Vivo and John Lowe, which is a kind of fundamentals like resource on what shaders actually are and how they work. And this goes into great detail of the whole fundamentals, so I highly recommend checking this out. And here you can see, some stuff like how noise is actually made, and breaking down, all of these visual elements that you might be very familiar with if you're working in this kind of field with TouchDesigner, but breaking it down to really like the mathematical fundamental level. And that's just, a very interesting aspect on describing anything visual in these mathematical ways, because in the end, that's what's happening anyway in all of these programs, right? On the barebone level. But for some visual people like me, it's just very abstract to comprehend it in terms of code, and it's way easier in nodes. And that's why, I love TouchDesigner. But in this workflow, it really kind of takes that fear away, and because of this kind of collaborative process with AI, it really also helps you to understand a lot of the code. So for me, it was, first of all, I got into like the basics of GLSL, learning like all the fundamentals, which I think is really important just to understand what you're actually doing. But then you can get to some like really complex levels very quickly as well. Now, the cool thing about shaders is that they are very interoperable. So they not only work in TouchDesigner and in fact also many other visual programs, like even in Resolume, using a specific format, and I'll cover that in a different video. But in fact, they also work in the browser. So for example, if you go to ShaderToy.com, you can watch and you can check out a bunch of different shaders, even with their code and how they were actually created. And so you can see that even, some very, very cool stuff like this doesn't need too much code to be created. And this can be a great resource for some inspiration and to see the possibilities that are actually there with these sort of shaders. And there's also like other tutorials, you know, on how to port these GLSL shaders from ShaderToy into TouchDesigner. That's a different topic, which is also covered pretty good on YouTube. In this case, just always be sure that you know, if you have the right to actually use these shaders, like, because they all have some different licensing formats, obviously. But this is just a great resource to get started and just get some inspiration. Now, one topic that I also want to cover quickly before we jump into it is ISF, which is the interchangeable shader format. And it's kind of this packaging for GLSL shaders that makes it possible to use them in programs like in VJ software directly, for example, in Resolume or others. I think there's a list somewhere here. If we go to the integrations. So here you can see all of the software that directly supports these ISF shaders. And in fact, you can obviously do the same thing for ISF shaders. It's just a bit of a different way of packaging them. So I'll create another video on that and how to set these GLSL shaders up in Resolume Wire to then import them into Resolume, which is also pretty cool because then you have everything kind of in one place. Now, when it comes to TouchDesigner, it's also documented pretty well on their website. And it's a bit different of writing, you know, the GLSL shaders usually. And that's kind of also where I had the problems in the beginning, especially with trying to write them in ChatGPT, just because it didn't really understand the context and how you have to set it up a bit differently inside of TouchDesigner. And that's what we're mainly going to cover today. It's just like also the troubleshooting aspect on making the format correct for TouchDesigner. Now, a great resource for this is this course by Lake Heckerman, and I'll also link that. I'll link all of those resources in the description. But this one really helped me out a lot to learn the basics inside of TouchDesigner on how to write the shaders and also on how it's different from using it in other programs. So highly recommend checking out this course, and this will help you a lot to not only understand GLSL shaders, but especially on how to use them in TouchDesigner. So as I mentioned, we're going to need a code editor for our shaders, and what I'm going to use is Cursor. And Cursor is a code editor that has AI very deeply integrated into it. And what's very cool about Cursor is that you can give it like predefined context, so it can kind of learn, or you can also kind of keep the progress from the mistakes that you made or the AI made in the past, and save that as kind of predefined prompts and context for the future. So, you know, this is especially great for what I just mentioned, that GLSL is a bit different in TouchDesigner. So if you just predefine like all of the rules that you have to address in TouchDesigner, so it works flawlessly there, you can just predefine that as a sort of rule, and I'll cover that in a minute. So you'll need a Cursor and just download it. You will need to log in for the first time, and then it will look something like this if you open it. Just some quick shortcuts here. If you press, I'm on my Mac right now, so if you press Command B, you will open up this window to the left here, where you can define your folder. And then you also want to go to this little icon here, which takes you to the extensions. And you want to look for the GLSL extension. And in fact, which one did I install? It was the GLSL literal, just so you can highlight the GLSL code with the color coding, and it makes everything a bit more readable. So that's just the extension to have the syntax highlighting for your GLSL code. So I can close that again, and I will set up my folder structure. And for that, I have my so I will set up my. So let's go into it, and I will set up my folder structure. In fact, I have it on my desktop already. I always have this folder structure for all of my projects. It's always 1 assets, 2 projects, 3 renders, and 4 exports. And in my projects, I will create this, or I already created this TouchDesigner file. And then just just for it to work in the most effective way, you define this as your folder for the project, for the cursor project. And that way, everything that's happening is going to happen in that folder. If you open up TouchDesigner, and in fact, I will put this whole project file up on my Patreon. The link is also in the description. You don't need it, but you can use it to follow along. And I am going to set up a new base to work within. And just one thing before we go into here, one quick tip that I always like to set up in TouchDesigner: if you go out one step with U or scroll out, you have this local base here. And if you go in here, I like to create this module space. So usually you wouldn't have this. I can delete it, in fact. And I would create a base called modules. And in there, I create a text dat called vars for variables. And in there, I will just edit it and type resx is 1080 and resy is 1080. And that is just to set up some variables that I can use all over my project. And I'm just going to set up a square image for now. And this way, if I go back into the base that we want to work in, and for instance, I'll just quickly to demonstrate it, create a new noise top. And then I go into my resolution tab. I can type mod.vars.resx, mod.vars.resy. And this way I can always have like a global resolution for all of my stuff. Now, for now, I don't need that noise. I just wanted to demonstrate this, and I will create a GLSL top right here. There is 2, and this is also something that like Hackerman covers in his video, but in fact, the only difference is that you have multiple inputs here, and you only have 3 with the GLSL top, so it doesn't really matter for now, but that's the main difference. And you can already see that this is creating my top as well as the actual code. Now, to edit this in my code editor, you will have to define the code editor in TouchDesigner. So you can go to the settings and to the DATs tab here. And as the text editor, you can define your cursor application. So you just open this, look for your app. Oops, now I deleted it. Now I'm gonna have to do it again anyway. So you just look for your cursor app here and define it as your text editor. And this way, if you now go back to the text and highlight it and press Command or Control E, that will open this code in your text editor. Now I'm gonna put this to my left, to my right, and the TouchDesigner window to the left, so I have it side by side. And this already has my example shader. And so in here, you will see the kind of example file of your GLSL shader, which right now is just defining white as the color for all of the pixels. And that's because we are accessing this frag color function, and this is getting the color variable, which is a vec4. A vec4. So basically, you have a couple different types of variables. You have the integers for whole numbers, float for decimal numbers, and then vectors for numbers with multiple dimensions. So vec2 is 2 dimensions, and then vec4 is something like, well, vec4 is 4 dimensions. And in that case, it means I am sending, well, I use 1 as a value for all of the dimensions, which is, in this case, R, G, B, and alpha. Now, if I set this to 0, so now you will see that I have nothing because all of the values are 0, which would be black, but also the alpha channel is 0, meaning I am getting a blank image with no alpha. So I could set this to black by setting all of the values to 0, but the alpha channel to 1. And if I save this, I will get a black image. And then if I set the red channel, for example, to 1, I will get a red image. And this is, how the shaders work in here. I don't want to go into too much detail. Again, the course by Lake Heckerman covers all of this in high detail, and I highly recommend it. What we're mostly concerned is just how data goes in and out of this GLSL node. So the function for the color is always this TD output swizzle, and that's just something that makes the GLSL top more interoperable for Mac and Windows, and just some behind the scenes stuff that is important. So that's something I would want to predefine in the AI, that it always uses this TD output swizzle as my final output function. And then another thing that you have with GLSL nodes, maybe let's just try to generate one, and then I can explain those. So let's try generating our first shader, and then I can explain some more detail. Now, to open up the AI assistant, I can press Command I or Control I on Windows. And you can see that it opens up this new chat, this text box with the that GLSL, which is our GLSL code as a context. So it knows that we're working in here. And now here's this, the important thing that we can do in Cursor that makes it so much more powerful is that we can set these predefined rules that I was talking about. If we go into the settings up here to the right, and I go to my rules, you can set up these project rules right here. And you have to define a folder. That's why we did that in the first place, define a folder where your project is based. And then you can apply a new rule. Now I already have a rule in here, and I called it GLSL. Maybe something like GLSL TouchDesigner would be even better to make it more specific. But what I defined in here is, first of all, you can input some documentation. So I just copied the documentation of the GLSL guides in TouchDesigner, and you can link them with by using an @ before. So I linked the documentation for the GLSL and the writing a GLSL top. I'm not sure how it works with like subfolders, but technically it should follow the links as well. And then I told it some stuff that, some mistakes that I ran into a couple of times just to have the output be more consistent. So I set it to always define a uniform for a resolution first named uResolution. Now, uniforms are variables in GLSL that are communicated from the CPU into the GPU, so they come from outside into our GLSL shader. And we define these. If you go to the GLSL tab and you go to the vectors, they can be defined here. Now, I'm going to cover what that means exactly once we created the first shader, because then it's going to be a bit more visible and understandable. But yeah, that's something we're going to cover in a minute. Then I told Cursor to never list the version, because usually in GLSL you would list the version as a first step, but this is also predefined here. So there's no need to define it in the code, and in fact it will give you an error. And just some other variables that the same way are predefined by TouchDesigner, and you don't have to, and actually in fact cannot define them, otherwise it will give you an error. And then also here again I said that always use the final texture should be the vec4 output swizzle. And I'll copy this text and I will put this on my Patreon. But this is just some stuff that will, make our results a bit more consistent, and it really helped a lot in this process. Now, if you define this rule, then let's just go back to the settings. This will be applied to all requests in this project, and that's fine. So yeah, that will just automatically be used for everything that we generate in here. I can close the settings again. I'll close my rules. So we're back in our GLSL code, and I have my agent activated here with the model Claude 3.7. Now you can play around with this. Claude is apparently better than GPT, and 3.7 is the newest version. There is some discussion if 3.5 or 3.7, which one is better. I didn't dive too much into it right now, but I'm just using the latest one for now. And then you can even define or give it some input images as references. So you could say something like, I don't know, how would you recreate this image with GLSL code or with the shader? Besides the agent, there is also the ask functionality, and you can open that by or switch to that with Command L. So Command L will open up the ask, and Command I will open up the agent. That's just two different modes of asking questions or letting it do actions directly. And so let's try to write a GLSL shader of a rotating rectangle. And we're just going to start with something basic so we can still have an overview of what our code does and the sort of troubleshooting that we need to go through. So let's see. You can already see it will recreate or create this code for you, and then you can accept it by pressing Command Enter. And now we have these uniforms up here that I mentioned briefly before, and these are the variables that we define inside of TouchDesigner, or that we can pass on through TouchDesigner, through chops, or to pass it into our shader. So I can copy the U resolution name here of the variable, and I need to go into my vectors tab of the top of the GLSL tab, and this is where I can define these variables, these uniforms. So in here, I can paste my U resolution, and I'm going to set it to me.width for the width, and then me.height for the height. And what this does is just look for the resolution of the GLSL top itself, which is right now 256 by 256, and take that as the value for our resolution for the shader. And now the resolution itself of the top, we can use the variable that we predefined before, so the mod.vars.resx and the same for res y. And this way, the shader will have our resolution of 1080 by 1080 that we defined previously. Now we also have a float variable for the U time, and I'm going to copy that. I mean, I can also write it, I guess. It's not too long, but you know, you can't be too lazy. And in here, it's looking for a single value, so for a float, and in fact, it's looking for the time. And to simply access, to quickly access our time, we can use our apps time.seconds script, and you can already see that we have our first shader written in GLSL by AI. Now, I'm just going to set an out after that and make that visible with D. So I have it in my background, and maybe also just disable my network editor grid so it's a bit more clean. So that's cool. And now you can see here, you know, simply what's going on, and it's pretty nice because Claude even comments out what exactly is happening in all of these sections of your code, and now you know it's time to start messing around with these values, and so you can really have fun here already. And I highly encourage you to, you know, not do the whole process through AI, but then also really get into the code, try to learn it, try to understand it, and try messing around with values until you get to stuff that you find really interesting. Now, anything that you want to access from outside, again, are these uniforms. So if something like the height and width is something we want to access from outside, we can just copy that or cut it from here, go here, paste it, and say uniform float width and uniform float height, uniform like that, and just delete this. And in fact, if you already have some values, that's going to be like the standard values that it will give them. It will define before you even pass on any values from here. And that's why it's not giving us an error right now. But I can just add 2 new vectors here for width, height, and then also save the code. And now you can see that I have access to my width and height of the rectangle from outside in here in TouchDesigner. And you know, that's always cool because now any of these values you can actually export to chops. So you know, you can have an LFO and that going into null, and then press A to access the value, go back to our GLSL top, and then just drag that onto my width, for example. And so now our width of the rectangle is defined by chops from outside. And yeah, I mean, this is just crazy because it's so powerful what you can do with this. And like when I discovered this the first time, I was just blown away by the possibilities that this creates. And of course, this is just like a super simple example, but it really demonstrates the point. And from here, we can really, go anywhere and start trying out some crazy stuff. So yeah, let's just go out of here, and then I'll call this my rectangle. And next, let's maybe try to create an effect for a video. So I'm going to create a new base. Go in here, create a new GLSL. No, not comp, but a top GLSL. and then again highlight my code, press Command E to edit it, and there we go, we have our code in here. Now for this to actually have a new chat in here, like, because right now we're still in the chat of the first code. So I'm just gonna click into here, press Command N for a new chat, and that will highlight or take the new code that we have as a context. And I'm gonna try something like maybe, well, let's go for the chromatic aberration effect. So create an effect for, or GLSL shader for a lens-like chromatic aberration in TouchDesigner for an input image. So let's try that. All right, perfect. That doesn't look too bad. That looks good. We have the uniforms defined here for the resolution. And again, because I set that as a rule in the first place, it always first defines a variable for the resolution. And then whatever else is kind of needed or makes sense to access from TouchDesigner itself. And then here you can see this texture st2d inputs. That is actually the input of our GLSL top right here. So it's taking the texture of the input, and then it shifts the R value by the factor that we define here, and the blue value and the green value stays in the center. So that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with a chromatic aberration effect. I'm gonna accept that, save it, and then again I have to define my uniforms. So I'm gonna go into the GLSL top, into the vectors, copy my resolution, copy my aberration amount. Actually, let me just create a couple of those because it doesn't really matter if we have empty ones. Aberration radius and vignette amount. And then resolution again, we're gonna define me.width and me.height. And here set our predefined resolution of the whole project. And it's still giving me an error, and that's probably because we don't have an input yet, but let's just check. So the way to troubleshoot any code here is it gives you an error message in the second window to the right here. And you can also access it with highlight the code and then paste it in here. And then that will, then ChatGPT will, Claude in this case will try to fix the error, but in this case it's pretty clear. You can see that in line 22 we have the 2D input, and because it's not getting any input, it says that it's an undeclared identifier. And so now if I access or if I create a noise and also set the resolution, use that as an input. Nice. You can see that we already have something going here. I'll just create an out node after and make it visible. So yeah, this is interesting. Definitely some chromatic aberration going on here. It's just quite strong because let's start with 0 for all the values. Oh, well, okay, so now it's already gone. We have a vignette as well. That's very nice of you, Claude. Thank you. So yeah, if I increase this here, you can see that we have a perfectly nice chromatic aberration. Maybe something that would be cool to change is on how it handles the edges here. But otherwise, that's really kind of exactly what's happening with a lens-like chromatic aberration, that you have the shift of the color channels along the... Oh, there we go. There we have the kind of a fall off. That's just a bit... I guess it would be nice to have that... does it work negative? No. So it would be cool to have that the opposite. Well, actually, it's quite nice that it's only on the edges. And then we could, again, if we handle the frame or the edges, then it would be fine. And the vignette is probably just, yeah, well, I guess this way, that's pretty nice as well. Wow, cool. Maybe I'll just put a transform in between to disable the alpha channel. So transform, set the alpha to 1 and comp over background color, and that way we removed our alpha. And this looks pretty cool. I'm gonna make the vignette amount stronger. Oops, what's going on? Yeah, TouchDesigner on Mac sometimes really has some weird stuff going on. And then maybe if I animate the noise by going to the translate z-axis, actually I'm going to use my own speed. Just create a speed chop, and then a constant before that. Drag that into a null. And then the null is what we're going to export to here. And if I start changing the value of the constant, that changes the speed. And that's just a really nice, fast way to have speed. Like instead of using the apps time dot seconds whatever function, to have a speed that you can actually control the speed of. Now, still being weird. For the radius, let's see. Okay. I have no idea what's going on here. I don't know if we can fix it easily. Yeah, that's cool. And just to try out kind of like the iteration, let's remove the vignette and see if it can take care of the edges. So let's say I don't want the edges to be visible. That's very, you should probably work with more concrete prompts. And again, that's why it's really important to know the fundamental rules and the fundamentals about GLSL and this whole, and all of these shaders. Because that way you can, like, the more you know, the more precise you can make your prompts. And the less it's going to be a prompt like, I don't want the edges to be visible. But you know, it works too. And in fact, it created a new edge softness uniform for us. So let's paste that in here. Accept the file. Yeah, that's fine. And then, okay, so that's very interesting. I still have the. So it's created a sort of soft edge. I mean, this is really nice, actually. It's like the subtle animation. Let me just make that a bit slower, and then I'll also change the noise. This is very similar to what I had in the example, but I mean, here you can see exactly what's going on. So you have this shift of the colors, but I'm going for this kind of glowing halo effect. Like almost if you look at the sun through a window, you sometimes get this halo. Maybe we can get something like that going. That would be pretty cool. But we're never gonna fix this issue, so maybe not. There we go, aberration amount. Let's set that up again. And then, no, there we go. So, I don't know if the edge softness is actually doing anything right now. Okay, cool. I think I got to a point where I really like the result right now, and for the sake of the tutorial, I'm not going to bother too much more about it. But also, just one thing you can, because sometimes it can be hard to what the actual values are and in what range they're normalized. So you can always ask Claude what values you should use, and sometimes it also directly gives you the recommended values for them. And again, you can either predefine some standard values in here before you even have anything coming from TouchDesigner. But just keep that in mind, is that's probably one of the issues that you will run into at first, is that you just have some weird values right here, especially when it comes to 3D space and you have like XYZ position of cameras and stuff like that. This can really help you to navigate that and troubleshoot. Cool. I'm happy with that. It actually looks really nice. And let's try some crazy 3D stuff now. So I'm just gonna call that Aberration 2 and create a new base. A new GLSL top. And let's edit our code. Let's create a new chat window here. 31, yeah, that's good. That's the one that we want. And then let's say create a 3D fractal shader in TouchDesigner, and I would like to animate values like the strength and folding. Also, let's go with that for now, and then we'll see where it takes us. Oh, okay. Got a lot of uniforms here. So let's start adding them. Do resolution, time, strength, folding. Would be nice to have some way to just automate that process. Oh, that's pretty sophisticated already. And me.width, me.height, apps time seconds, and define a resolution here. I'm gonna open up my ask menu and ask what some recommended values for the uniforms. Okay, time strength should be 6. Folding between 0 and 1. Iterations 5 to 15. Let's try 10. Bailout. And then the camera position 0, 0, 3. And the light position 2, 3. Okay, let's save this and let's see, there's nothing happening. Ah, there was something. All right. Okay, there we go. Okay, So I needed to go negative on the z-axis of the camera. So yeah, that's where, stuff can get a bit weird sometimes, and even, asking for these standard values doesn't always work. So yeah, just keep that in mind. But it just shows that it actually did work. It was just some of the wrong values again. So yeah, I mean, this is crazy, honestly. Create an out node, make that visible again, and there we go. We have a fractal, and yeah, you can see that I can animate my light here. I can animate the colors of my lights, and all of that stuff. So from here, it's really just a matter of experimenting and seeing where the process takes you. But just the just the fact alone that, I mean, I still can't fully comprehend what the implications of this are, and it's a bit wild, to be honest. But I find it super exciting. It's a very interesting process because it's not kind of this full AI process. It's really, that you still have to do a lot of, give it the right input and define what it is you're trying to achieve. But then also just creating stuff like this in such a quick time, it's just crazy. I don't know. I just realized in this case the time isn't even doing anything, so it's kind of irrelevant. But I guess if you later decide to map the time or to correlate the time with some parameter in there, it could still be useful, but we could also delete it right now. It doesn't really matter. Then also something we can animate maybe is the folding. I think this is a pretty cool looking effect. Whoops, that was a bit much. So let me add an LFO here and a math to remap the range, and then a null just to use that as our export. And I'm going to drag that into my full. That's nice. That's pretty cool. Jiggling. And then that's actually perfect. So we're going from negative. So it's already normalized to the correct range. Well, okay, -1 to 1. And I want it to go a bit stronger, so let's try -5 to 5. And then we'll decrease the... So yeah, that's kind of the process behind all of this. And I really encourage you to, not recreate this, but to get creative and explore completely different visual worlds and be open for the happy accidents and the process. And I'm really looking forward on what you can come up with. And I hope this was a good overview and helpful in order to create the shaders correctly for TouchDesigner. I think this is a really powerful method, and it's nice because it's using AI in a way that will still create very varying results. It's not this kind of aesthetic where all of the outputs look the same, but it really depends on kind of the input and the idea that you have and where you're going with it. It's just crazy because I think this opens so many new worlds of like creating visuals. But I think it's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to what you can create with it. I will have all of the project files on my Patreon, and I will link all the links in the description below. So thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe if you are new to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.